take your seats. Members, before we commence, I would like to remind members that once again this week's business has been amalgamated into a single sitting, and there will be 3 ministers responding to oral questions. To avoid a long suspension during the sitting, the Business Committee has agreed to schedule a motion to suspend standing orders, the standing order that requires question time to commence at 2 p.m. Subject to that motion being agreed, question time will commence as soon as all other business concludes. This will probably be at around 10:40 to 10 a.m. Question time will commence with the Minister for Communities, followed 45 minutes later by the Minister for the Economy, and 45 minutes after that by the Minister of Education. The Business Committee will meet at 1 p.m. or after the sitting adjourns. A lunchtime suspension has not been scheduled. Thank you. Ms Gemma Dolan has sought leave to present a public petition in accordance with Standing Order 22. The member will have up to 3 minutes, and I call on Gemma Dolan.
And thank you for the opportunity to present this public petition with regard to the adoption of the wastewater treatment works in Ravensbrae, Garrison, County Fermanagh. The wastewater treatment works serving Garrison has been at capacity now for 2 decades. Because of this, for the Ravensbrae development to get planning permission, the developer had to build his own wastewater treatment plant. Through bad planning policy, he was allowed to build a treatment plant that was not up to the standard that NI Water could adopt. This has left the Garrison community and natural environment around the village with a ticking health and ecological time bomb on its doorstep. My first preference would have been to go door to door with this petition, but as we all know, the current health regulations prevent me from doing so. Therefore, I would like to thank the 258 people who have taken the time to sign the online petition. 258 signatures may not seem like a lot, but bearing in mind that Garrison has a population in the region of 350 people, these signatures represent a large majority of the residents and their concerns. We have a number of unadopted housing estates in Fermanagh and South Tyrone. However, Ravensbrae is of particular concern due to the raw sewage that could potentially be leaking into the world-famous Loch Melvin, which is internationally renowned for its unique range of plants, animals and fish. Loch Melvin is the only location in the world that the Gilroy trout can be found. In response to a written question to the Minister for Infrastructure last year, I was told that it could be at least 6 years before the sewage infrastructure in Garrison will be updated. Quite frankly, Cancorlia, the people of Garrison cannot and should not be expected to wait 6 years. The electricity supplier is threatening monthly to cut the power to this wastewater treatment plant, as the developer who built it is refusing to pay the bill. The result of this will be similar to what the residents of Gallia experienced. Raw sewage running down the street, children not being able to play outside, not to mention the smell. I know updating the sewage infrastructure can't happen overnight, so I'm asking the Minister to instruct NI Water to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant in Ravensbrae to NI Water standard and adopt it. If this is impossible, for whatever reason, the least the ratepayers of Ravensbrae and Garrison expect is that the Department of Infrastructure, through NI Water, take over the management of it until the main sewage system is updated and extended in Garrison. The planners have let down the residents. The developer has let down the residents. This petition calls on the Minister of Infrastructure to not let down the residents. In 2021, sewage treatment should not be treated as a luxury. It's an essential utility.
Thank you. And the member will know that normally I would invite her to bring the petition to the table and present it here. However, in light of social distancing, I would ask the member to remain in her place and make arrangements to submit the petition to my office. I thank the member for bringing this petition to the attention of the Assembly, and once received, I will forward the petition to the Minister for Infrastructure and send a copy to the committee. Thank you. Ms Joanne Bunting has sought leave to present the petition in accordance with Standing Order 22. The member will have up to 3 minutes to speak, and I call Joanne Bunting.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am grateful for the opportunity to present this petition calling for sanctions for cyberbullying before you and this House today. I've been requested to do so by a grieving family from my own constituency of East Belfast, but this is a serious subject which will have touched many families right across Northern Ireland. The Gregg family lost a precious son who was a beloved brother and father himself to suicide as a result of relentless targeting for 6 months on social media. Mobile technology is freely available and necessary in today's society, So bullying and targeting is not only distressing for its subject, it can be relentless and feel like there is no escape. No one is immune from cyberbullying. We're all potential targets. It affects people of any age and from any walk of life, but it can be overwhelming and devastating. Sometimes the hope that it will stop simply runs out, leaving nothing but despair. And then what? Originally started for Mental Health Week, some 10,630 people have signalled their support online for this Families campaign, and I have another 1,246 physical signatures in my possession. These signatories to this petition are calling for sanctions on those who, often with unremitting viciousness and for fun, drive someone to take their own life or to attempt it. We seem to have become a society, Mr. Speaker, that is generous in our charitable giving, but unkind with our words. Social media has become a place where it appears acceptable, often behind a veil of anonymity or a persona, to say anything, regardless of and with little thought for the impact that their words or their message may have on the recipient. There are many who advocate loudly for tolerance, but show none when behind a keyboard. There must be more stringent regulation for platforms or a stricter interpretation of the rules, or both, for those who breach and misuse them to bully, resulting in a desperate person coming to physical harm at their own hand. It is important that legislation keeps pace with an ever-changing world, and therefore I believe it is right and necessary that consideration is given to legislation specifically dealing with cyberbullying, which leads to suicide or an attempt. These 10,000 people in Northern Ireland call on the Justice Minister and this Assembly to say enough and to introduce a sanction, and I support their call. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, in light of social distancing, I would ask the member to remain in their place and make arrangement to submit the petition to the Speaker's office. I thank the member for bringing this petition to the attention of the Assembly, and once received, I will forward the petition to the Minister of Justice and send a copy also to the committee. Thank you. The next item of business on the order paper is a motion to suspend Standing Order 21. It will be treated as a business motion and there will be no debate. Clerk, please read the motion.
That Standing Order 21 be suspended for 16th February 2021.
And I call John O'Dowd to move the motion. Before we proceed to the question, I would remind members that this motion does require cross-community support. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The first item of business is the introduction of the Severe Fetal Impairment Abortion Amendment Bill, and I call on Paul Gibbon to move the first stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to introduce the Severe Fetal Impairment Abortion Amendment Bill.
Clerk, please read the long title.
A bill to amend the Abortion Northern Ireland No. 2 Regulations 2020 to remove the ground for an abortion in cases of severe fetal impairment.
And that constitutes the bill's first stage and it shall now be printed. Thank you. Point of order. Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an unusual situation this morning because the proposer of the bill only decided to provide us with information on it at 10:16 this morning. But with reference to Standing Order 30, Parts 5 and 6, and also Standing Order 34, and I'm sure the proposer of the bill will have no objection to this, given that he stated that his bill is fundamentally about human rights, can we be assured that we will have written evidence from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission on the content of the bill before we proceed to scrutiny of it? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would say to the member that there is nothing unusual with the procedure this morning at all. In fact, the procedure was very much in keeping with past practice, a very recent practice as well. We have had motions which have been tabled, including by executive ministers, at short notice and so on and so forth. It is at the discretion of the member, the sponsor of the bill, to have that scheduled as for the first stage. But of course, every other stage of the legislative process will take place then through the Business Committee and so on and so forth, and it'll go through the House in the normal procedure. So there's nothing unusual. I just want to put that on the record. Nothing unusual by the procedure by way of which Mr Gibbon has tabled this motion this morning. Point of order.
But you haven't addressed the issue of the issues around the receipt of the Human Rights Commission's advice before we move to scrutiny.
Well, we do engage with the Human Rights Commission, but that will be a matter then for their, in terms of their response. They will also have the opportunity to present their own evidence as well throughout this. So this legislation, this bill, has now had the first stage tabled here this morning. The bill will be printed and it will go through the normal process through the Business Committee as an ongoing process by which legislation is always proceeded. And I will ensure that the legislation will be governed and processed and managed properly in my role as a Speaker. Thank you. I just ask members to take a raise for a moment, please. Okay, members, it's time for questions to the Minister for Communities, and I call William Humphreys. Mr Humphrey.
Mr Speaker, question number 1.
Call the Minister.
Thank you for your question. The Shankill Gateway Public Realm Scheme received full planning permission in July 2020. However, Belfast City Council has since raised a number of considerations around the omission of a redesign of the Peters Hill North Street Junction from the planning approval. My department has engaged with the Department for Infrastructure and Belfast City Council through a joint junctions working group to review Peters Hill North Street Junction and develop designs to improve this connection to the city centre. When final designs are agreed and a revised planning approval obtained, if necessary, my department will consider the budget position against other priorities.
Mr Humphrey, supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for her answer. Can I ask the Minister to expedite those conversations with the Department of Infrastructure and Belfast City Council to ensure this development, which has been talked about for some time, is actually put in place as soon as possible? And also, can I ask the Minister for an update on the development of the junction between Lanark Way and Shankill Road, which would include St Matthew's Church, the shops, Glenwood Primary School and West Belfast Orange Hall, which was due to start some months ago, hasn't, and was due to start this week and doesn't appear to have started?
Thanks very much. Well, the conversations with the Department of Infrastructure and Belfast City Council are ongoing and moving as quickly as possible. Obviously, Belfast City Council have developed their bolder vision for Belfast, and part of that vision is about overcoming severance with surrounding communities. You know yourself, the Belfast City Centre is surrounded by inner-city working-class communities. And there's other work ongoing in terms of that whole shatter zone that runs along Peters Hill, I suppose from Carrickhill, the New Lodge, right through to the bottom of Divis Street. And therefore they're taking an overarching look of the essential road work that needs to be done, and obviously the Department of Infrastructure is a key part of that in terms of what measures they're going to be moving forward. We are trying to move at pace, and I'll update members as soon as that work has been completed. So there is a commitment that there should be no undue delay around this programme. It will move with other key strategic sites along that shatter zone in terms of trying to move those sites forward as soon as possible for development. In terms of the other scheme you talk about, I don't have at hand the information on that, so I can follow up just with a written response to you in terms of when that scheme's going to start.
Mayor Carol Nicullen. I call Carol Nicullen.
I thank the Minister for her response to William Humphreys. She mentioned that the Peters Hill North Street junction is intentionally or originally included in the scheme. Could she also, even in writing, make sure, or if she can, talk to our colleagues in infrastructure and Belfast City Council regarding where that fits in with the shatter zone that you referred to, and indeed the strategic site assessment that Belfast City Council and her department are involved in? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. All of those strands of work are important strands of work in terms of Belfast City Council's bolder vision for Belfast. I do give a commitment in working with the Department of Infrastructure and also Belfast City Council that we're taking a really strategic longer-term view of this entire space in terms of the shatter zone, the undeveloped sites that sit there, and indeed the roadway and public realm works that need to be done. I know Belfast City Council's vision is to overcome severance with surrounding communities, and it's been a long-standing issue. Indeed, when those communities were consulted, it's one of the issues of feeling to be locked out of the city centre is one of the key issues that they have raised. And obviously I want to give a commitment to remove that severance and to restitch those communities back into the city centre and the city streetscape. And obviously public realm, roads infrastructure is a key part of that. So there is a commitment from me to take that work forward. Once those conversations with Council and DFI are concluded, I'll update members accordingly.
I call Andy Allen.
Minister, it's clearly evident in your draft budget that your department is under severe pressure in terms of your wider budget. With that in mind, Minister, is there any proposed schemes in the forthcoming financial year that may be under threat?
Well, the draft budget is that at the moment. It is in draft. Obviously, there are concerns that have been highlighted through the equality impact assessment, more so to do with the revenue side of the budget than the capital. I'm assessing those at the moment and obviously taking into account the consultation that is out at the moment pertaining to the draft budget, and then I will come forward with what my budget will look like, what I'm prioritising in the time ahead, and I'll be able to update members in more particulars around the capital and the revenue once we get to that point.
I call Stuart Dixon.
Number 2.
Thanks very much for your question. Statutory sick pay is an important tool in helping people to adhere to the current advice to stay at home if they have symptoms of COVID-19 or have been advised to self-isolate. However, as I am sure you will appreciate, these guidelines are easier to comply with if you know that your income is enough to support your family. I recognise that anyone moving from a salary to the current rate of statutory sick pay faces a substantial drop in income and financial uncertainty. Increasing the rate of statutory sick pay could go some way to encouraging people to fully comply with the requirement to remain at home and to protect the health service. In March of last year, I wrote to Theresa Coffey, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, to request an urgent consideration be given to increasing the rate of statutory sick pay and to ensure that individuals are properly financed and supported during the pandemic. This will ensure that those who are self-isolating do not continue working, thereby potentially endangering their health and the health of others, further spreading the virus. Unfortunately, I only recently received a reply from Justin Tomlinson, MP, Minister for Disabled Work and Health, and I plan to meet with him in the coming weeks to request an urgent consideration in giving an increase to the statutory sick pay. I should also highlight that I responded quickly to provide financial support to those who have had to self-isolate by including an additional support through the discretionary support COVID-19 self-isolation grant. This payment is designed to assist with short-term living expenses where a person or a member of their immediate family have been infected by COVID-19 or have been advised to self-isolate in accordance with the latest guidance from the Public Health Agency. And I suppose just to add, once I have that meeting with Justin Tomlinson, I'll update members as soon as possible.
Stuart Dixon, supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for a very comprehensive and detailed answer. Minister, can you tell the House what actions, if any, you're taking with the Minister for the Economy to further and advance statutory sick pay payments in Northern Ireland, not only during COVID, but also beyond, coming out of the COVID pandemic, how we can improve statutory sick pay for everybody in Northern Ireland who finds themselves in those circumstances?
Yeah, well, obviously discussions are ongoing. I have a meeting due soon, a request in with the Minister of the Economy to look at this issue and a number of other issues where both departments need to be working together in terms of looking at the issue of statutory sick pay, but also looking at labour market interventions being another example. So I'll be able to update members once we progress those discussions. I think this issue obviously needs to be looked at. This pandemic has really highlighted the fundamentals and the faults within the system currently, and we need to find ways of addressing that to ensure that people aren't having to choose going to work over their health because they don't have the finances to sustain them. I did, as I say, introduce new measures within the existing legislation constraints that I have around discretionary support, and again I'm keeping all of that under review as well to see how we can improve those systems also. So I'll update the member in due course.
Nicole Carroll Mullen.
Minister, I know that you have been determined since the start of this pandemic, along with Carol Nicollen, to do whatever it takes to support those most impacted by COVID. In addition to the statutory sick pay, you touched on it there. What other changes have you made to ensure that this support is delivered, or that this support is delivered to those who need it?
Yeah, well, overall, I mean, the department has stepped up. Obviously, our staff within the department has really stepped up throughout the height of this pandemic. And I suppose I have to take the opportunity to commend the staff within the Department of Communities who really do want to get support out the door and onto the ground as soon as possible. We have invested over £304 million in support over the last year, right into the heart of communities and neighbourhoods. We've increased the income threshold for discretionary support, and that was one of the first measures that were introduced last year. An introduction of the self-isolation grant was introduced as well. We also broadened that in terms of it being a grant, and also the awareness of people able to draw down on that grant. We introduced food supports in terms of the immediate aftermath of the COVID pandemic when people were being instructed to stay at home. And obviously there's been a variety of other supports, from council funding to go in and assist council with services and loss of income. Heating payments, which you'll see that over £42 million has been invested in an additional COVID heating payment, and that's to over 220,000 individuals. And that was in groups who were seen as high risk. Again, I continue to review all of the measures that we're trying to implement, discretionary support, which is unique to here in the North, and to see how we can make those schemes that are there more flexible to ensure that it reaches as many people as possible.
I remember Patty McGlone. Call Patty McGlone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers up until this point. The Minister, I'm sure, will more than appreciate that for people trying to eke by on £95.85 per week statutory sick pay, and they in difficult circumstances themselves, both health-wise and family-wise, that the discretionary support mechanism is elongated, it's lengthy, it's difficult to get through on. Has the Minister given any consideration to a particular SSP top-up scheme, especially tailored to the needs here in Northern Ireland, to obviate all that? Because you will appreciate too, Minister, that in these circumstances where people are off work who have tested positive, they're least able to go through an elongated, either computerised or telephony mechanism for making an application for discretionary support.
Yeah, I thank the member for your question. And I suppose in the midst of the pandemic, again, as I say, it threw open a lot of issues in terms of how the system functions, changes that need to be made. There was quickly changes made to the discretionary support to try and make it more flexible for people. The application form was shortened. We did put it online to ensure then that people could access it that way too. There's continues to be improvement in it, and obviously I'm going to be conducting a review of discretionary support, which is bounded by legislation. That may mean a legislative change in the time ahead, but I am keen to ensure that the existing mechanisms that are there, can we make them more flexible to ensure that people who need them can get them as quickly as possible? I'm obviously keen, that's why I've written to the Department of Work and Pensions in terms of statutory sick pay overall. There are changes that need to be made. There are financial implications then in terms of any uplift in statutory sick pay, and obviously that has to be forthcoming, I believe, from the Department of Work and Pensions, because there's a knock-on effect then to employers and the contributions that they will have to make. So again, we have to look look at this all in the round. The important thing for me is trying to get support to people who need it as quickly as possible. That meeting is due to take place in the next couple of weeks with DWP. I will be putting this strongly to them, but I'm also committed to reassessing measures that I already have in place within the department to ensure that we make it as easy as possible for people in a time of crisis that they can access that support as quickly as possible. Part of that review will be talking to people directly who have been through the process. And can we make changes there then, as you say, in terms of the application itself? Can that be more streamlined? Are there quicker ways? Are there extra supports that we can build in to ensure that we get all the information that we need, but that they can get the support that they need as well as soon as possible? So again, as I'm working through this review, the meeting with DWP, I'll update members to the conclusion of those.
Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Minister, for your answers. Minister, given the fact that only 2% of people who have received the discretionary isolation grant have been able to get the £500 or more figure, as part of the review, will the Minister look at implementing an automatic payment of £500 at least for people so they can isolate safely, especially those who are low earners?
Well, I think one of the big things, just to compare the payment with what's happening in England, it's not a straight scheme across the water, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, and that it can be taxed in terms of how that scheme is being implemented. I want to build as much flexibility into the discretionary support as I can to make sure that the assistance that people need, that they are getting it. So whilst it's not a one-off £500 payment, the discretionary support here is a grant, it's not a loan. You can apply more than once. And I think that's the important thing, that you can apply multiple times if you are or a member of your household is isolating as a result of COVID. If there are other flexibilities that I can build into the scheme, that's going to be part of the review that I'm doing into discretionary support. This isn't about stopping people trying to access help. I want to make sure that I can open up the help that I can give to people in a manner as quickly as possible, and to make the process as easy as possible for people to go through. That's why it will be important as part of that review that I engage with those professionals that have an expertise in this, but also that I engage with those who have been through the system, who maybe had a negative experience of discretionary support, and to learn from that experience on how we can improve the customer service, but also how we can streamline the service to ensure that it's meeting the need. And then we will look at all of that. I mean, as I say, I've increased the income threshold, and that was about trying to get as many low-income families into it again, and all of that will be part of the review going forward as well.
Question 3, Mr Speaker.
Thank you for your question. My department acted swiftly to put in place a range of programmes and schemes to support both individuals and organisations from the impact of the COVID pandemic. To support individuals, a fund of £3 million was made available for discretionary support self-isolation grant, and as of the 31st of December last year, 19,975 claims have been processed, of which 3,883 were unsuccessful. For sporting organisations, a fund of £27 million was made available through 3 schemes. For 2 schemes, a total of 2,808 applications were received, of which 526 were unsuccessful. The third scheme is still being processed at the moment, so we don't have those figures yet. For charitable organisations, funding of £20.5 million was made available through the charitable grant scheme. In Phase 1, 1,646 applications were received and 129 were unsuccessful. Social enterprise support was also provided through funding of £9.25 million, with 394 applications, 79 were unsuccessful. Information is not yet available for the other schemes which my department has put in place, such as the Community, Voluntary and Social Enterprise Sector, PPE scheme, Culture Resilience scheme, as they are still being processed and applications are being given out at the moment. And again, I'm happy to share that information once it's available.
Supplementary.
I thank the Minister for that detail. I think if you're designing a COVID mitigation scheme based on qualifying criteria, it is probably inevitable that individuals and groups will fall through the cracks. So I wonder if the Minister would agree with me that it would make sense to form a subcommittee of the Executive as a sort of appeals body, populated by herself and maybe the Ministers for Finance and the Economy, and that this would represent a better safety net for those who do miss out.
I suppose in terms of the schemes and discretionary support, for example, I mean, over 80% of the applications have been successful. Obviously, for that just on over 20%, we still need to be doing work. I'm keen to engage across the executive where I can in terms of looking at additional supports, learning from things that maybe haven't worked in the past. That's why I've instructed a review of discretionary support. I want that to be in some ways independent as well, and I'm involving people from outside the system to be involved in that review also, to ensure that there is that level of independence, there's that level of scrutiny and accountability. But importantly, in keeping with the co-design, which I give a commitment to in terms of co-design and policy going forward and embedding a rights-based approach, I want to involve those on the ground, those who have been impacted by the supports either in a positive way or a negative way, to ensure then that we are meeting their needs going forward. That's why I'm going to be doing this. In terms of an overarching group, I mean, I haven't looked at it in terms of the suggestion you make, and certainly I do have ongoing engagements with ministers on certain schemes across the executive. We're obviously looking at the pathway to recovery in terms of that not just being an economic recovery but a social recovery. So again, we will be continuing those discussions, which will be cross-departmental across the executive in terms of learning from the impact of this pandemic, the impact that it's really had on poverty, and it's exacerbated the problems that are already there. And we do need to work in a more collaborative, joined-up way in terms of the solutions, and that's something that I'm committed to doing in the time ahead.
Call Paula Bradley.
And can I thank the Minister for her answers thus far? And I want to caveat my question with, in our constituency offices, we know we hear about the negative more than the positive. So I want to talk about the COVID-19 discretionary support. And just, Minister, what would you say to those people that have been turned down, that were quite literally told to go to their cupboards, count how many tins they had in their cupboards or what they had in their fridges? And when we know that people's needs are not black and white. So when we look at the review, could you give your word that you'll look at this at a common sense approach, because not everybody's situation is the same?
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I mean, as I pointed out, obviously the majority of those who have applied, over 15,000, have been successful in the scheme. That said, I need to be looking at those who haven't been successful and who are still in plight in terms of the situation through no fault of their own that they find themselves in. I think it is important as part of the review that we reach out to those individuals, not just talk to those who have had a good experience of the system, but also those who have had a negative experience as well. I think there is an issue. I mean, on the one hand, we really do have a team of dedicated staff who live in the communities in which they're providing this service. And I have seen, particularly throughout this pandemic, them really stretching themselves to go above and beyond. You know, we did change stuff immediately at the outbreak of the pandemic to make it more flexible. We increased the income threshold. We done the online form. We shortened the form to try and make it easy as possible. That said, there are still things that can be done. There are systems that can be improved. There's customer services that can always be improved. And I do feel that there is a commitment, not just from me as Minister in terms of this review, but also from the Department and from the officials themselves. They see the value in this review being conducted. They see the value in an independent look at that as well from sectors outside, and importantly from those who have come through the system and those negative experiences, to work out, is there a common thread in that? Is there a common issue that needs to be dealt with? And I'm open to ensuring that this is an open and transparent review, and that we actually make it better for those people. The big thing is around instilling dignity, a rights-based approach into the system. And if we're serious about that, then we need to listen to those people who have had a negative experience and reshape the system to respond to their needs. I'm committed to doing that. I know the staff within the department are committed to doing that, and indeed I'll update members as we start to work through that review of discretionary support.
Emma Sheeran. Emma Sheeran.
Minister, thank you for your answers thus far, and I know you've reiterated your commitment today to getting help and support to those people who are in need. And in light of that, could you outline what you're doing in order to increase the uptake of the discretionary support?
Yeah, I suppose there's been a lot of work, and I mean, one of the common things is people not knowing where to get access to help. There's maybe a plethora of different systems in terms of help. I suppose the first thing, we have worked with the Public Health Agency and included a link in the NI Direct Coronavirus and Benefits web page in terms of the financial support and practical help. I've also worked successfully through the Department with the Department of Health to include information on this grant as part of the Stop the COVID app. We obviously have a good working relationship with the advice sector and the independent advice sector, and indeed information on this grant is available through those organisations as well, and indeed through our jobs and benefits through the staff within the department as well, in terms of updating and informing members. I think in terms of the discretionary support, I mean, this is going to be a fundamental part of the review as well, around how people knew about the service, how they could access the service, were there blockages in terms of information, was it clear? I mean, I know when I read some websites you get confused in terms of trying to find them, so I want to make it as easy as possible for people to find the support, and particularly, I mean, these are people in a distressed state. They have lost income, they're wondering how they're going to have food on the table or heat their homes, and we do need to make it as easy and as accessible as possible. So as part of this review, I am given a commitment to look at that issue. We do need to be shouting about these supports and trying to find other ways. We do have a good network of community and voluntary organisations that have really stood up throughout this pandemic in getting critical food support and other supports out to communities. So we do need to find new ways of reaching out to people, of engaging them, and my department is open for looking at any suggestions or ways that we can increase, I suppose, awareness around the supports that are there.
I call Rachel Wood.
Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for answers so far. It should be aware that many have fallen through the net for support from many schemes issued by the Executive, not least the sports and social clubs that have got a hospitality element, and they have been pointed to the Sports Sustainability Fund, which is administered by your department, but it closed on the 20th of January. So is the Minister minded to reopen this and look at the eligibility criteria with the Minister of Finance?
Well, I think firstly those applications are being processed at the moment. That did close on the 19th of January. It was clear within that process that assistance could be given to sports organisations who are impacted, that if they are, for example, operating a bar facility, if there's a reduction in that and it's impacting on their sports side, that they can apply through that fund. I know from the assessments a lot of clubs have applied through the sports fund for lost income through their enterprises, and indeed those costs in some ways will be met through that grant. So there are ongoing discussions. I haven't had a big, I suppose, lobbying from organisations. I mean, what I have got up until now is a lot of the sports organisations have applied to the grant. We're going to be making announcements, obviously, on that fund shortly because assessments are concluding. A lot of the costs then that they have applied for, if they can show that there's a direct impact on the sport that they're doing, then that will be looked at as part of this fund. I suppose the fund has been maxed out in terms of the money that I have at the moment. If we do see that there's an additional need or that a new need emerges, then that has to be taken into consideration in terms of new COVID support going into the next financial year. So I'm keen to engage, obviously, with the sporting codes, with individual sporting bodies, with the sports forum and also Sport NI, to look to see if there are any gaps in the existing fund and what we can do to provide new or additional supports going forward. All of that obviously will be dependent on budget, but again, I am committed to looking to see what I can do to close any gaps that may exist. We haven't been made overly aware at the moment of any. We haven't had a demand, but that may come obviously as the applications and the notifications around funding is released in the coming week or so.
I call Alan Chambers.
Speaker, question 4.
Thank you for your question, Member. Just advancement of the plans to complete the Regional Stadia programme, including Casement Park, is a commitment in New Decade New Approach Agreement, and I'm fully committed to delivering on this priority area. I welcome the announcement from my colleague, the Minister for Infrastructure, in October 2020 of her intention to improve the Casement Park planning application, and have recently written asking for an update on this. There continues to be significant engagement with the GAA in relation to the development of the Casement Park project. The Regional Stadia Programme Board, chaired by the SRO, meets monthly. Representatives from the Ulster Council GAA attend in respect of the Casement Park project. Members of the Stadia team also attend regular meetings of the GAA Project Board. My department officials meet with the Ulster Council GAA weekly to ensure that this project is being delivered at pace. This is in addition to the many project-related meetings both teams attend with relevant project consultants and advisors in attendance. I also have regular meetings with the GAA Casement Park team and members of their project board to assess the progress and to discuss current issues pertaining to the project.
Supplementary, Alan Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your update. Minister, can you confirm that there is a degree of a funding standoff between your department and the GAA in relation to the delivery of this project? And will those funding difficulties in any way put this project in danger?
I don't see a standoff in terms of at the moment. I'm not sure if that's what you mean in terms of your question, but there has been good discussions and engagements with the GAA in terms of the development. I think there is a commitment from both myself and them that we need to see the final regional stadia being developed. We obviously have Kingspan and Windsor already up and running, notwithstanding the COVID restrictions, but we have seen the benefits of those two stadia, and I think it's right that we complete the third and final stadia in terms of young Gaels and Gaelic games that are coming up and in terms of that wider community impact. As I say, we're waiting the outcome of the planning. We need the green certificate in order to progress with the full business case being finalised. In terms of that then, obviously there has to be a discussion and a negotiation around the cost. I was at committee last week and said, and I know Minister Nicolin, who was in place of me when I was off, that there has been already public comment that with an increase in cost, then that has to be shared out. It has to be looked at in terms of both the executive but also the GAA making additional contributions. But all of that will be finalised in the full business case once the planning certificate has been given, and then those negotiations will steep up at a greater pace over the coming months once we have that certificate in place, which I'm hopeful should be in the coming weeks.
I call Chris Little.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Minister when she will release the sub-regional stadia funding and seek her assurance that this long overdue and desperately needed funding will be allocated to clubs like Glentoran and my own constituency of East Belfast before the end of this mandate?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for your question. And I suppose, I was at committee last week talking about both regional and sub-regional stadia. They're both commitments, a new decade, new approach. I am committed to having this programme up and running before the end of this election mandate and before the end of before the elections next year. I did think that it was prudent that there was a reassessment looking at the commitments and the need for the sub-regional stadia, because the initial plan is over 10 years outdated. There was another consultation in 2016. A lot has changed between now and then, notwithstanding the impact of COVID as well. So there has been a wide range of engagement with football clubs and associations, with the IFA and others. We're in the middle of concluding on those, and in terms of recommendations coming to me as Minister, and then I will outline my plans in the time ahead around how the sub-regional stadia will be rolled out.
That ends the period for a list of questions. We will now move to topical, 15 minutes of topical questions, and I call Alan Chambers.
Speaker, Minister, what steps have you taken to ensure that those healthcare workers who have received the £500 acknowledgement and those healthcare students who have received a £2,000 acknowledgement from the Health Minister will not see it have an adverse effect on any social security or income support benefit they may already be in receipt of? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for your question, and this is an important one. And obviously, our healthcare workers right across the board have done a tremendous amount of work throughout this pandemic, and they will do after this pandemic in terms of delivering a healthcare service. I think in terms of the £500 payment, I am committed to doing all that I can. I think that there is a way of doing it in terms of that it won't be impacted through tax or also a loss of benefits. I'm waiting on a request just formally coming in from the Minister of Health in terms of looking at this, but my department and officials have given a commitment that we are waiting and ready once that request has been received. I know that there may be something or a word that needs to be written into the legislation that the Minister is bringing forward, and indeed my officials are engaging with officials in health around what that wording needs to contain in order to ensure that the issue of the £500 can be paid with no detrimental impact to those receiving it. So the discussions are ongoing. We're just waiting on the formal request coming in, but officials are on standby to do all that we can to ensure that the payment can be made as soon as possible.
Alan Chambers, supplementary.
For that, Minister, in the absence of some mitigation coming forward, would you agree that a number of the recipients of these acknowledgements could be forced to maybe having to refuse a payment, and that would be a shame? Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Just quickly, I mean, the quicker that we can get health and my officials engaging, the better. And obviously, we have put the request out to the Department of Health to be forthcoming with their request officially to my department. I have officials ready and waiting to deal with this. And also they need to amend that piece of the legislation under the coronavirus regulations that they're bringing through to ensure that these payments can be made as quickly as possible. So there's a commitment from me. I'm sure there is a commitment from Robin as well that we do this as quickly as possible.
William Humphrey.
Minister, you'll be aware that I've written to you in regard to a site on the Ballysullen Road at Sunningdale, which has laid for some time since the masonettes were demolished. There seems to be an impasse between your department and the Housing Executive. Can I ask you to intervene, as I did in writing, to ensure that this site is developed for the benefit of the community and it doesn't become an environmental blight?
Yeah, no, just on this, I mean, I'm aware of the correspondence from yourself, William, so I'm looking at this at the moment. Discussions are ongoing with the Housing Executive in regarding this site as well, and just wider sites. And again, I'll come back to you just in writing with an update on where that's going as quickly as possible.
Minister, can I just raise the issue in terms of Casement Park? You said that you have had significant engagement with the GA and your department that continues to have. Can I ask the Minister, community consultation is hugely important around these issues. What consultation have you as Minister had with local residents, in particular the Mora residents group?
Yeah, community engagement and consultation is key. And I know that the GAA are in the middle of developing and just laying out the community engagement plan. I've had no direct engagement yet in terms of the local residents in and around the facility. Obviously, we're awaiting the outcome of the planning decision. We're still waiting on the green certificate to be issued to look at what the terms of that planning are in terms of the development of the site, but also the management of the site going forward. And I know there may be considerations there in terms of community engagement, not dissimilar to how these facilities are run, for example, in Croke Park and also in Cork as well. I am keen to engage. I mean, I come from a community like Andersonstown. I have a community development background, and I see the critical importance of engaging with residents, those who are concerned around the stadia, but also those who see the positive impact that a stadia can bring to the community. We are looking at the community engagement plan at the moment. Obviously, we want to pick up pace in that once the plan and permission certificate has been issued in terms of moving to the full business case. And I will lay out my plans in terms of that engagement going forward, along with what the GAA will be doing as well and what they need to be doing in terms of that grassroots community engagement.
I call Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could give an indication of how many people are currently benefiting from welfare reform mitigations, such as the so-called bedroom tax and the benefits cap.
I don't have the exact numbers in terms of those who are benefiting, but obviously the mitigations are ongoing at the moment. They have been running from last year. The mitigations are still being paid. And there is a commitment that they will continue. Obviously, I have draft legislation and regulations in terms of closing the loopholes to ensure that I think it's just over 220 families, to include that they don't fall through in terms of the loopholes that are there at the moment. I will be bringing that forward then for executive approval soon. And for those to be introduced in the new financial year. The budget obviously is there. I mean, it's been committed to in terms of these mitigations going forward. I can write out to you with the specific numbers of people under each of the sections in terms of the bedroom tax and also the cap and how many households are being impacted by that. and then I will do that in writing, and then update members just once the legislation and regulations are due to come through. And obviously an SR1 form will be going to committee, just detailing what those regulations are as well.
Supplementary, Mike Nesbitt.
Given we're about 6 weeks from the end of the financial year, are you concerned about what happens to these people if you don't bring the legislation through on time to extend the mitigations?
No, I suppose it is. Given a commitment, I am committed to going through with these mitigations. The Executive is committed through the New Decade New Approach. There will be no stopping at the end of the financial year the money that's there. The money will continue to run. It's in the budget into the next financial year, and there will be no break in those payments. So I'm committed to make sure that those payments are continuing. The issue that we need to fix as soon as possible is the loophole, so families who fall through the existing mitigations, and I'm committed they are contained within the regulations. So I'm hopefully confident in the time ahead that whilst the legislation will move through, that the regulations, which will be a shorter period of engagement with the committee, can pick up on those issues to ensure that we give protections to those families as soon as possible.
Call Nicola Brogan.
Given the recent attack on the Belfast Multicultural Centre and the ongoing issues of exclusion, inequality and racism faced by the BAME community, would the Minister agree that political leaders have a responsibility to show zero tolerance for racism in our society?
Yeah, I think 100% they do. And I think where racism or sectarianism, for that matter, raises its head, that it needs to be challenged, that there needs to be a united community approach in terms of condemning it. I met with the group, the Belfast Multicultural Association, just after the fire. I was there on the scene. I know I reported this at the last question time, and I met with them on the Monday after, including the North West Migrant Forum and other groups as well. And the big issue they had was saying that, you know, a tweet up condemning these actions wasn't enough, that we needed to stand side by side. I know that's difficult in the current conditions around the regulations of COVID, but that we do need to stand beside these communities, that we need to be showing our support. I give a commitment to do that, and obviously I've written since then to the First Ministers, but also to the Justice Minister in terms of specifics around that fire, but also looking at anti-racism working strategies more broadly. But I do agree we need to face it down where it raises its ugly head, and we need to stand with those who are victims of these crimes.
Supplementary, Nicola Brogan.
Would the Minister join me in condemning the disgraceful and racist comments by DUP MP Gregory Campbell? All political representatives should understand that their words carry weight and can have real-life consequences for those in our society who face racist abuse and attacks. Unfortunately, this is not Mr Campbell's first outburst, but his party should ensure it is his last.
I condemn any words being used or any actions that can lead to an increase in a feeling of hostility or that can lead to a hate crime itself. I mean, I think when I engaged with members of ethnic minority communities after the fire, one of the key things was, I mean, they did say that words are words, but words can hurt and words have consequences. And I do think it is important for any elected member to think about things before we tweet them out or put them up. I mean, people have fallen foul of tweets that have been issued in the past. I do think that we all, I mean, education and awareness around issues of anti-racism and anti-sectarianism, that we need to be continually learning. We need to be continually engaging with those groups and organisations. I know from after that fire, I mean, there is a genuine fear within these communities. People who even put their head above the parapet to raise concerns after the fire had a fear that they were then going to become a target of hate crimes themselves. And as political and elected members, we have a responsibility to stand with those communities, to de-escalate tensions, and also if there are genuine fears there, and there are, we need to overcome them and challenge racism or sectarianism wherever it appears.
And I call Mervyn Storey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her continued work of her officials and also her predecessor in relation to assistance that they've given in my Northampton constituency in relation to the Northampton Village Forum. It is much appreciated. Minister, yesterday you announced the £50 heritage organisations will receive funding through the Heritage Recovery Fund. Could you confirm as to whether or not the Causeway Coast and Glens Heritage Trust, based in the village of Armoy, will be in receipt of this funding?
Thanks very much. Well, I think, it's my predecessor, Carol McCullen, in terms of this money being allocated towards the end of last year. Obviously, we're working with the Heritage Lottery, and this funding is for organisations to support them in terms of heritage, but also for individuals such as tour guides and all of that as well, to ensure that they're sustained throughout the pandemic and that the heritage is protected in the time ahead. I don't have the specifics yet in terms of the applications because they're done by an arm's length body in terms of who's been successful at hand, but I can send that to you in terms of a breakdown of the funding that has been allocated. I think it is critical funding. I can just see just from some of the announcements yesterday on Twitter, it's a lifeline for both individuals and organisations to ensure that we do protect our heritage, our built environment. They're important even in terms of local community education, but also in terms of tourism and people who come to visit here. They're showcases and they're exceptional. So there is a commitment that we're going to continue to work with those organisations in the time ahead, along with the culture and arts sector, the creative industries more broadly, because they do make a contribution and they're going to be vital in terms of the recovery piece, the social and economic recovery that we're going to be taking forward as an executive. So in terms of the specifics, Mervyn, I can get that sent to you just after this.
Supplementary, Mervyn Story.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. And will she ensure, because obviously there's public comment around where some of this money will be allocated, some to very large projects and also to organisations such as the National Trust, but it is vitally important that smaller organisations and rural organisations who make, such as Causeway Coast and Glens Heritage Trust, an invaluable contribution to that sector and to our communities, that they are not excluded as opposed to larger organisations.
I think that was important across all of the schemes that we're supporting, be it heritage, culture, arts, sports, that it's not just the larger organisations or representative bodies, that we do ensure that those organisations working at the grassroots and often at the coalface receive that support as well, and that there's that balance. And importantly also for individuals as well, which this scheme did pick up in terms of those individuals that are involved in that broader tourism or heritage piece. So there is a commitment from me to do that. Obviously, I want to look at more work in terms of rural communities as well, not just in terms of heritage, but across the board in terms of the programmes that my department are doing to ensure that we are rural proofing in a real way. And obviously I want to continue that engagement with the Deirdre Minister also. We have, with Deirdre and also with the Department of Infrastructure, brought forward additional funds this year to support rural communities, and we've worked collaboratively in doing that. And I have written to those two ministers just within the last week, again requesting that we start to do that in a more structured way and to ensure that we're really targeting. I recently met as well with the Rural Community Forum in terms of picking up a variety of issues, not just around heritage, housing, community development and other issues, and I want to continue to engage those as part of that conversation with the other two ministers as well. So again, I can update the member or the House as we're moving through that.
I call Pat Shagan, and you won't have time for a supplementary.
And the Minister will be aware that the building of New Casement Park is greatly anticipated both in West Belfast and among the GAA and sport and fraternity, and I know the Minister has been a great advocate for it. I wonder, could she tell us when she anticipates approval of the business case and what the next steps are in the whole process?
Thanks very much. Well, Casement is a key project to get delivered, as I say, with the other two regional stadia. I played in Casement as a young camogue, and obviously I want that same experience and opportunity afforded the other young Gaels that are coming up across Belfast, but indeed across Ulster as well. I have given a commitment that I want to see this project be developed as soon as possible in line with the sub-regional stadia as well. I have everything up to date that I can do within my department. I'm waiting on the green certificate being issued from the Department of Infrastructure. I have written to the Minister just asking for a timeline of when that's going to be completed. I know discussions are ongoing and I'm hopeful that that will be completed soon. That will allow me then after that to pick up pace to get the full business case finalised, the negotiations around that finalised. Once we have that in place and a timetable, I will then update members as soon as possible. I'm keen to have this done as quickly as possible, that we start to get this moving over the next couple of weeks and months, as soon as I can get that green certificate from the planning.
And time is up. Could members please take a ease for a moment or two? Thank you.
It is now time for questions to the Minister for the Economy, and can advise members that question number 5 has been withdrawn. I call Nicola Brogan.
Garmiagad Laskin Corla, Kesh Ever Hain at Hull. Question number 1, please. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My department is working closely with further education colleges on the provision and distribution of this funding to full-time enrolled learners throughout Northern Ireland. Full-time further education students who have been marked present at least once on an e-register during the month of January 2021 will receive a one-off cash payment of £60 into their bank account to offset data costs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Within this allocation, 500 iPads or similar devices have also been put on order and will be loaned to further education students requiring online access.
I call Nicola Brogan for supplementary.
Students in rural areas such as my constituency in West Tyrone have struggled to complete learning and remote learning due to poor broadband connection. In terms of digital hardship scheme, will additional mobile data allowances be given to students who need these to complete their studies and their online exams? Can I thank the member for her question? As I indicated in my previous answer,
Part of this particular 1.7 million allocation will be used to help young students buy access to further data. This should help with digital poverty alongside the additional iPads or computers that are required for young people. In addition to this, throughout the course of the pandemic, an additional 4.8 million of funding has been provided to colleges earlier in the financial year to buy also to buy IT equipment. And some colleges have obtained data, SIM cards for students to access broadband, and to date 1,197 of these cards have been made available to further education students. I hope that this does alleviate the members' concern, because I do understand that this has been a very difficult time for young students who have missed out on that college experience and have had to rely on online teaching. And no matter how good that is, even the loneliness and remoteness of that has been difficult for young people.
I call Mark Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Has the Minister engaged with network providers on mobile data, and does she know how many more masts and where across the north these masts should go or must go for full mobile connectivity?
The telecommunications part of my department continuously is in contact with mobile providers, and particularly as we move to the rollout of 5G, which is very important for the connectivity across Northern Ireland. I do not know the detail around the masks to hand, but I will of course be happy to write to the member.
Moving on, I call Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Question 2, please.
Can I thank the member for his question? Project Stratum will utilise public funding gained through the DUP Confidence and Supply Agreement, together with investment from Fibrous Networks, to deliver gigabit-capable broadband infrastructure to more than 76,000 primarily rural premises across Northern Ireland, including, I would say, 4,236 premises in the member's own constituency. It is the biggest infrastructure project ever undertaken in Northern Ireland, and for the members, further information work is already underway in Killyleagh to provide this important connectivity. Following contract award in November 2020, the deployment of infrastructure commenced immediately. Work is underway in the first 5 deployment areas: Coal Island, Killyleagh, Ballycastle, Kilkeel and Castlewellan. Fibrous Networks have planted in excess of 374 poles, installed 8.2 kilometres of duct and completed 63 kilometres of fibre cable. The fact that these build activities have already commenced at this stage of the project is a significant achievement, given that network providers typically use the first 6 to 9 months for planning. Therefore, while we had anticipated that this period would be required for network design, it is now expected that the first premises will be live in the first quarter of 2021, and over 19,000 of that 76,000 will have been passed by the end of this year. Fibrous Networks has advised my department that the COVID-19 restrictions has had some delay due to additional paperwork and the challenges that it presented. This is a good news story for Northern Ireland, building the connectivity of the future for the economy.
I call Mike Nesbitt for supplementary.
I thank the Minister for that response. In terms of a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, could she inform the House what are the current threats to Project Stratum?
Project Stratum continues to be rolled out. And we will be looking at, for example, those projects or those premises that are not within the scope of Project Stratum, but there are currently no threats to the rollout of Project Stratum.
I call Declan McAleer.
Thank you.
and I share the Minister's comments that this is a good news story, that this is a very good news story. The Minister will be aware that in the assessment for broadband, the initial figure which was provided that there are about 100,000 premises in the north that don't have access to broadband, or certainly of decent quality broadband. But the figure quoted now for Project Stratum is 76,000 premises. That's a gap of over 20,000. Could the Minister tell us, has she had any engagement with the Project Stratum team and indeed with DCMS in Westminster to look at a means to try to reach those premises that are not currently in the Project Stratum intervention area? Can
I thank the member for his question? It is a good news story for Northern Ireland. As we have seen during the pandemic, connectivity is key, particularly for rural communities, but particularly for all communities. And it is key to the objectives of growing the economy in Northern Ireland and that regionally balanced economy that we all seek. Currently, there are about 3% of premises that should have been within the target intervention area that are currently out of scope of Project Stratum. We have already had discussions with the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport and with Fibrous Networks, and we are working to identify the solutions and costs to bring these premises into the intervention area. And I will update the House as soon as I have further information on that.
I call Stuart Dixon.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister. Minister, in addition to the welcome connectivity which Project Stratum will give, BT recently estimated that Northern Ireland is one of the most digitally connected regions in the United Kingdom. What actions are you taking along with Invest Northern Ireland and Intertrade Ireland to promote Northern Ireland as a digitally engaged community to enhance business, particularly in relation to our unique position in relation to both the GB and the EU markets?
Well, of course, the member makes a very important point and makes the point that many times we use when we are talking to investors who are thinking about coming to Northern Ireland. It is an absolute delight to be able to say that for those tech and digital companies who are already in Northern Ireland, they find Northern Ireland innovative, hardworking, solution-driven, and many of them, while completely operating for the past year at home, have been winning contracts with their larger home markets in North America. Productivity has increased, and they are an absolute credit to Northern Ireland. This is one of the spaces where we think that we can grow the economy further. For Belfast and the Greater Belfast region to be recognised as, one of the most exciting digital hubs in the whole of the United Kingdom is extremely, extremely important. However, I would have to advise the member as well that while all of these things are hugely important, and these are connected with the service economy, which of course is not subject to the rigours of the protocol, we must fix the impact of the protocol on Northern Ireland. To be disconnected from our biggest market is a huge disadvantage to Northern Ireland. And for those who continue to blindly support the protocol, then they will be turning their eyes away from the impact on businesses, on families, on jobs, and the potential for the economy in Northern Ireland to grow.
I call Thomas Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Minister, thank you for your answers so far on this issue. And being from a rural area, I know what the difficulties that are being faced by the rural communities with regards to poor connectivity whenever it comes to broadband. And I hope that the Project Stratum will address those issues whenever it's finally rolled out. But can I just ask you that why are areas of greatest need not prioritised in this programme? Obviously, if we take the rural areas and out into the rural communities that are really affected at this time, why are they not prioritised, and what impact would that have right across Northern Ireland?
Can I thank the member for his question? He makes a very, very important point. And can I point out to him, for information for this House, that in West Tyrone alone, 9,591 premises will be impacted by Project Stratum and will have the superfast broadband that they so need if we are to build that regionally balanced economy that we all seek. In relation to the substance of his question, when the contract and the tenders for this were done, it was made clear that we had to roll it out in a way that made the best use of the monies to encompass the most houses that we could get into the project within Northern Ireland. Hence the construct of the programme so far. I look forward to those first 19,000 houses being connected by the end of this year, and shortly in the spring of this year the first live connection. That will be quite a moment for the largest ever infrastructure project for Northern Ireland.
Moving on, I call Paul Frew.
Number 3, Minister.
Can I thank the member for his question? I have made clear that at all times I will act in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland and our local economy, in accordance with my ministerial responsibilities, the Code and the statement of the 2nd of February by our party leader, which I know, like me, the honourable member fully supports. We have indicated to our own government that they need to act, but we also need to send a message to the government of the Irish Republic that North-South relationships are also impacted by the implementation of a protocol for which they are cheerleaders, and which does real damage to the agreements they purport to uphold, along with the real damage it does to our businesses, consumers and communities here in Northern Ireland. We can and we will not continue to act as though relationships have not been impacted by their actions. We will consider each matter on its merits, not doing anything, of course, that negatively impacts on Northern Ireland, but it cannot be business as usual for North-South relations because of the issues that flow from the protocol.
Call Paul Frew.
Thank the Minister for her very clear answer. Can I ask then, would the Minister agree with me that the protocol is causing significant economic and societal harm in Northern Ireland? Does she further agree that it cannot be business as usual in respect of North-South relationships, given the horrific and unhealthy attitude of the Republic of Ireland's government towards Northern Ireland during the EU-UK negotiations, and indeed the actions of the NIO in changing the Belfast Agreement regarding consent? And will she assure the House that she will only partake in North-South activity where there is a clear advantage for Northern Ireland, its businesses and its people?
I can indeed assure the House that will indeed be my position. I in no way want to negatively impact upon Northern Ireland, on the stability of its people, on its political process, or indeed, importantly for me in my role, on its economy. However, I do recognise, and I have spent many times explaining and going through the difficulties that the protocol represents for Northern Ireland, that rupture within the UK's internal market that the protocol has brought about. And I find it somewhat disconcerting that nationalist politicians and cheerleaders from the Republic of Ireland simply refuse to acknowledge the folly of the protocol in the North-South relations, in East-West, the East-West trade, and also for communities and individuals and families. So let me give you some of the issues that I have been dealing with over the last number of weeks. And these are very real issues that impact on families across Northern Ireland. So we have the issue of an e-commerce market within the United Kingdom that is broken, parcels that can't arrive. And of course it's easy to make sort of snide or remarks on Twitter about parcels, but the real impact is on families and businesses across Northern Ireland. My department has been following the e-commerce issue very closely. We've been tracking what has happened to a number, over 100 businesses that did send parcels to Northern Ireland. Out of those, 6 weeks into the protocol, only 143 of those businesses have made any changes.
The Minister's time is up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. But what we are very clear is that there are significant challenges and significant difficulties.
I call Kiva Archibald.
And I thank the Minister for her responses so far. It's quite clear that Brexiteers argued for Brexit on the basis of fantasies and mistruths and ignored the concerns and fears that have now been realised that Brexit would bring only disruption and difficulties. A report last week by Manufacturing
Can we have a question, please?
Highlighted that the majority of businesses here want practical solutions to make the protocol work. Does the Minister not agree that her time would be better spent engaging with those businesses and promoting our valuable access to the European market rather than engaging in silly political stunts?
I will remind the member in this House that I, in my former role as a member of the European Parliament and as a minister, have consistently warned of the dangers of the protocol. And all those parties in this House that want the rigorous implementation of the protocol do so at the expense of families and businesses within Northern Ireland. I am not in the position of stunts. And if I was, I need only to look at the party opposite and the breaking of walls at this imaginary border that we have had and all of the stunts that have gone over. If there are stunts in this House, this party has the monopoly on them.
I call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Minister, one important way that we could ease east-west disruption caused by Brexit would be through the signing of an EU-UK agreement on SPS, specifically a veterinary standards agreement. Switzerland has one of those, Norway has one of those. They are both outside the European Union. If the Minister is serious about wanting to ease east-west disruption, will she commit here and now to calling on the UK Government to sign a veterinary agreement and to align in a much closer way with the EU on veterinary standards? That's a practical way we can ease disruption. Is she willing to make that call here and now on the UK Government?
Well, of course, the member is well aware that the kind of Swiss-type arrangement that he talks about requires the whole of the UK to slavishly follow EU rules in every respect. I used to, in the European Parliament, hear them say, that if the Swiss wanted to turn right, they had to ask Brussels permission to do so. As someone who voted for Brexit, who believes in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, then I will always want the United Kingdom to act as one. I regret that our Prime Minister imposed the protocol, cheered by many in this House, to the detriment of Northern Ireland. It is up now to the Prime Minister to fix the problem that he created, to take up that duty that he has to United Kingdom citizens here in Northern Ireland and remove the barriers to trade, particularly in relation to the issue of SPS agreements. But perhaps, the member should also reflect, when he is cheerleading for the protocol, what really the SDLP want about this. So we cheerlead for the protocol, yet the SDLP leader writes to me in my department asking me if I'm going to design a scheme and provide a financial assistance to businesses who are experiencing additional costs from the protocol.
I call Steve Egan.
Indeed, may I thank the Minister for her remarks so far. And the Minister may not be aware, but this morning Mariusz Šefčovič has said that he will be meeting with Northern Ireland businesses and civil society this week. I believe it's on Thursday. Do you think it is discourteous, to say the least, that Mariusz Šefčovič is not listening to unionism, and particular political unionism, in our steadfast opposition to this very unequal Northern Ireland protocol?
I think that where the European Commissioner reflects, I think, denial that many in this House have, that certainly our own government have in changing the consent mechanism to the protocol, and indeed a position that the European Union have long had. I think it is disingenuous, the politest and mildest way I can put it, to call for the full implementation of the Belfast Agreement in all its parts and then change the rules of the Belfast Agreement around consent because their pet project might not gain consent in this House. I think it is time that nationalist politicians here, in Dublin, in London, and in the European Union actually listened to the fact that those delicate balances created by the Belfast Agreement have been completely thrown out the window, and that political unionism is united in opposing the impact and the protocol in Northern Ireland.
Moving on, I call Andrew Muir.
Deputy Speaker.
Can I thank the member for his question? I continue to work with the Finance Minister on the replacement of EU structural funds. The Department for the Economy has a clear interest in the EU replacement funding, given that ESF and ERDF programmes have historically funded substantial activity within our policy remit, such as economic development, energy, skills and apprenticeships. A successful bid in January monitoring provided my department with domestic funding for existing ESF projects within the current financial year. This effectively enables my department to defer spending European Commission funds of around 26 million until 2022-23, when otherwise that funding would have run out. The mechanism for extending this ES activity is currently being explored, and I hope to make a formal announcement in the coming weeks. This welcome outcome provides my department with additional time to develop appropriate succession programmes and secure the necessary funding for these valuable interventions.
I call Andrew Muir for supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Northern Ireland's in a very different place now, and we need to plan for the future. Can the Minister please perhaps clarify the situation with regards to her attitude towards this future? Is the party, the Minister, going to work with the protocol and look to find solutions with the rest of us? Or is you turning your back on reality, on North-South cooperation and on economic success?
I can assure you that my face is firmly planted towards the future. I'm currently working on future interventions for the Northern Ireland economy because I want a successful, stable, prosperous Northern Ireland where all its citizens can live and feel valued. That is an important point of principle for me. I, however, and I can understand pro-protocol parties making a bit of a song and dance about this because kind of gone away from rigorous implementation to a few teething problems, etc., etc. And I can understand the member's point. But let's be absolutely clear. Our biggest market is GB. We sell more into the Great Britain market than we do into the Republic of Ireland, the rest of the EU and the rest of the world put together. It is absolutely imperative that we fix the fissure that has now developed in the United Kingdom's internal market so that we can help Northern Ireland to progress. And if I may, Mr Speaker, because this is an important point, for many firms, they will not know what their future holds like because they may rely on supply chains that bring goods from the EU, which then have to come to Northern Ireland as part of the manufacturing or retail processes, and those goods, because they traverse through GB, may be hit by tariffs if they are at risk of falling into the single market. We need to have clarity for our businesses, and before we can move on, that interruption to the UK's internal market needs to be fixed.
I call Christopher Stalford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Would my friend agree with me that it is bizarre to be in a situation where political parties in this House will defend arrangements that will impose additional costs on families and firms? Would she agree with me that what we're dealing with here is a group of Belfast masochists defending Brussels sadists?
Yes, that's quite the description. But what I find, what we have here is this kind of bury your head in the sand attitude. And of course, it's very common in Brussels, because in Brussels, the political project comes above everything else. We've seen that in relation to vaccines. We've seen that the political project trumps people's lives in relation to the vaccine supply. And it trumps everything in relation to Northern Ireland. I don't believe that Brussels really cares about Northern Ireland. It has used it shamelessly as a bargaining chip for years.
I call Emma Sheeran.
Minister, it's clear that our departure from the EU has led to quite a lot of losses in terms of structural funds, and I know that your own department has apparently lost some 70 million in terms of the European Regional Development Fund and European Social Fund, and I know that things between yourselves and the British Government maybe aren't great at the minute. You are on somewhat of a break, but can you give us assurances that you have sought clarification from the British Government that this funding is going to be replaced by them, and have you received that confirmation?
Can I thank the member for her question? And she takes us into the territory of the replacement programmes for European funding and how that will work for the future. It is important that we address the issues around apprenticeships. I don't think anyone, whatever political persuasion in this House, would deny the fact that I have absolutely championed young people and apprentices at every opportunity within Northern Ireland. It's important that we look at young people who are in our training networks so that they have a good start in life. And I will continue to work to identify that programme. But I am looking forward to, and I think that our government needs to give us greater clarity on the successor programme to these, the Shared Prosperity Fund, and how we can work within the parameters of that, not just to get additional funding for the needs in relation to training and apprenticeships, etc., but in relation to real investment in Northern Ireland that recognises the needs and priorities of the Northern Ireland Executive.
I call Jim Allister.
And the former First Minister, Peter Robinson, very perceptively said, "You cannot try to ditch the protocol and administer it at the same time." Which choice does our Economy Minister prefer?
That clearly is not related to the question. Over to the Minister if she wishes to make a response.
I will, of course, make a response because I think it is an important one. And perhaps the tone of Mr Allister's question reflects his position all along that he doesn't want to see Stormont succeed or to have the institutions here. I have said very clearly in my first answer to the question that I will act at all times in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland and in conjunction with my ministerial responsibilities. I take those very seriously and I will do that. But I will continue to oppose the protocol that has brought such damage to the economy in Northern Ireland. And we are only seeing at the start of this year, for the first 6 weeks of this year, we've been focused, most of our time has been focused on the issue of movement of goods. Firms across Northern Ireland are about to put in what they call supplementary declarations. Those supplementary declarations will deal with the issue of tariffs. I expect to see significant disruption at this level as well.
And that is the end of our period of time for listed questions. And we now move on to topical questions. And I call Nicola Brogan.
Minister, the recent announcement of the £500 COVID disruption payment was welcomed by many higher education students. However, full-time students studying in further education colleges, part-time students, international students in the north studying in the 26 counties, and students in the north studying in Britain have all been excluded. Minister, will you address these inequalities, ensure that students who are currently excluded will be entitled to this payment?
Can I thank the member for a question? She raises an important and, dare say, a topical question for the moment and the time that's in it. I was delighted that I was able to announce a package of almost £38 million of support for students within Northern Ireland. That support will, as the member rightly says, deal with the £500 individual payments to all students. It will increase the hardship funds that are available to our institutions by another £8.5 million, including a focus on mental health of young students and the issues around digital poverty that many of our young students are facing. I recognise, and that is why I asked for and gained a support package that is probably the most generous of any part of our United Kingdom. There are about 15,000 students from Northern Ireland who study in institutions throughout the rest of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. Our department holds no database for those students, and I also have no legal remit to ask universities or institutions in the rest of Great Britain to authorise payments to those students. That is not within my legal purvey at this moment in time. But those students are not without help. And just as EU students or Scottish or Welsh students can gain help through the schemes here in Northern Ireland, those students who are studying in Great Britain will gain similar help through the schemes that are there. And just recently, Scotland announced an additional £30 million for hardship, Wales £40 million for hardship, and England £50 million for hardship. And I would encourage those students to use the schemes that are in the particular institutions that they belong to.
Call Nicola Brogan for supplementary.
Minister, back in November you told the Assembly that your department would be reviewing the level of support provided to postgraduate students. These students don't receive maintenance grants or loans, and it's a major barrier for those on low income. Minister, can you provide a date for when this consultation on postgraduate funding will be launched, please?
Yes, well, I can't provide you the exact date, but I will be this afternoon discussing this very issue with the senior team in my department, and we hope to launch the consultation in the very near future.
I call Christopher Stelford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I ask my honourable friend what plans she is putting in place for the reopening of the economy?
Again, can I thank the member for his question? I think that we all in this House must be rightly proud of the way that our health service has responded to what has been the most difficult period in our history, and also responded in their vaccine rollout. And I am hopeful because we have been managing to get significant numbers of our people within the vaccine programme, and this is a credit to those who are organising it, Patricia Donnelly and her team, and I think we should all acknowledge that as a matter of fact today. However, as we progress, we need to make sure that we open our economy safely, and that we open our economy for the long term, and that we break this cycle that we've been in of open and shut, which is so destroying to so many businesses. I had a meeting on Friday with my local chamber in Banbridge, and it is very disturbing to hear how so many businesses are literally hanging on with their fingertips at this particular time. No amount of schemes that we can devise or no amount of help that we can give is a substitute for an open economy that is trading freely. In the next number of weeks, I'll be working with the task force in the TEO, but I will also be bringing forward my plans for economic recovery and, most importantly, plans that I hope the Executive will respond to for a skills budget for Northern Ireland, which will not just open the economy, but will help that economy to trade successfully with appropriate skills.
I call Christopher Sulphur.
Thank you. And speaking as someone that's been in hospital 3 times in the last year, I absolutely associate myself with your comments in relation to the National Health Service. Can I urge the Minister to be bold in pushing for the fullest possible opening up of our economy? Because it is utterly soul-destroying for people that are trying to run businesses in particular, that every time there appears to be light at the end of the tunnel, up pop some public figures demanding that we build more tunnel.
I absolutely agree with the member in relation to his very last comment that messaging is very important and can have a significant impact on businesses. I had a meeting with some business organisations and was very disturbed to hear, because of the issues and the problems and the longevity of the pandemic, that so many of them had mental health problems, some had contemplated suicide. This is no way to run our society, and it is very difficult, and messaging is key in all of that. Yes, I think that we will want to open up our economy. We want to do it safely, and we want to do it in as swift a way as the transmission of the disease allows us to do that. I will, of course, be working with colleagues in order to bring that about. But I have to say that I think that this House could support us. There are some things that I think our national government can do, and that is the extension of furlough. There are particularly aerospace and tourism and hospitality where the tail of recovery will be long and troublesome, and I think the extension of furlough is key. For tourism and hospitality, extending the cut in the VAT rate is also key. And I know that my party colleagues at Westminster are taking up all of these issues, but it is important that we send that united voice on this very, very important issue.
And I call William Irwin.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, would the Minister agree with me that parties who enthusiastically call for the full implementation of the protocol bear some responsibility for the disruption caused to business and consumers? Many of us have been contacted by constituents angry that they can no longer receive parcels from GB. Has the Minister raised this with the UK Government?
I thank the member for his question. I have raised the e-commerce market in the United Kingdom on a number of occasions with both BES, my reporting department, and indeed with Michael Gove, who is undertaking most of the protocol issues. It is absolutely vital that we have a UK e-commerce market that thrives and that every business and individual in Northern Ireland can be part of in an equal way right across the United Kingdom. That currently is not happening. And we currently have significant disruption with firms who simply will not commit to trading with Northern Ireland. That may be because they don't know the changed circumstances, it may be because that information came too late, or it may be indeed because the so-called grace period that Michael Gove announced runs out on the 31st of May. These are the problems of the protocol. For those who sit on the opposite benches and deny them, then that is for them to explain to families and individuals and businesses across Northern Ireland.
I call William Irwin for supplementary.
Can I thank the Minister for her response? I'm sure is the Minister aware that many hauliers are facing very difficult and challenging times? One haulier yesterday with 20 trailers sitting in England can't get loads back because businesses will not supply. This is a big issue for hauliers. Many who are making a loss this last 4 weeks or 5 from the protocol commenced.
Yes, the issue of hauliers, of course, is hugely problematic for Northern Ireland. Indeed, I was talking to one haulage company in my own constituency where they admitted that they had no They had no alternative but to raise prices. Those prices will in turn be passed on to consumers and be passed on to businesses in Northern Ireland. The protocol inevitably brings less choice and higher prices, and that's just an inevitable outworking of the protocol. I also was talking to Hospitality Ulster, and they were actually saying that if we consider things like export health certificates due to run out in another few weeks, grace period in chilled foods, if we consider the fact that the food service industry is only operating currently around a third of the level because of the shutdown that it would normally operate on, that the protocol problems will become more intense and deeper as time goes on.
I call Sinead Bradley.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for West Tyrone for raising my questions on students, but I will use the opportunity for a different question. Minister, I listened attentively to your answer to question 3 and about the North-South ministerial meetings, and you said that you would consider each matter on its merit. Does the Minister accept that following your pledge of office, it is your duty to participate in North-South ministerial meetings and not your choice?
The member does not remember the first part of my answer to that question, which said that I would at all times act within my ministerial responsibilities and the Code of Office.
I call Sinead Bradley for supplement.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that clarification, because there is a duty on you, as there is on all ministers, to represent all the people of Northern Ireland. And in that vein, I would ask, moving forward, what plans does she have to ensure equality is offered to the people of South Down, who have been for a very long time at the latter end of any work through Invest NI and securing inward investment and jobs? What plans has she to rectify that situation?
I, of course, will write to the member individually about the issue of South Down, but I crave equality for the citizens of Northern Ireland. Equality within the UK's internal market, equality within the UK's e-commerce market, that all citizens in Northern Ireland are treated on the same basis as citizens right across the United Kingdom. This protocol interrupts that, provides a huge fissure in relation to that, and equality is high on my agenda.
I call Pam Cameron, and you may not have time for supplementary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Minister if she agrees with me that reintroducing click and collect for all retail stores would go in some way in helping businesses who have been losing out to trade because they've been forced to close, while larger retail outlets have been allowed to remain open?
This issue is a source of great frustration to me. I have now brought 2 papers on click and collect to the Executive, and so far we have had 1 discussion and no decision. If we want to reduce the inequality in how small independent retailers are treated vis-à-vis the big multinationals, we have to move to allow them to trade in some respect or other, and that inevitably will include click and collect. I again will put forward my paper for discussion on this particular matter on Thursday, and I hope it can be resolved.
And that is the end of our period of questions to the Minister for the Economy. I would ask members to take their ease for a few moments, and anyone who is leaving the chamber to respect social distancing. Order, members. It's now time for questions to the Minister for Education. And I call John Stewart.
Please. Thank the member for his question. The Minor Works Capital Programme remains under pressure. However, the Department has successfully bid for an additional £15 million of capital for minor works in the January 2021 monitoring round. Investing all of this additional capital before the end of March 2021 will be challenging. However, this additional capital is an extremely welcome boost in relieving the ongoing pressures.
I call John Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his response, and I'll declare from the outset an interest as a Board of Governor on a number of schools. Setting aside the frustrations and concerns around COVID and the lack of information sometimes that principals receive, the single biggest issue that I get complaints and issues raised from principals and teachers is that of the delays around minor schemes and capital works. Almost every school in my constituency has raised concerns, having been on waiting lists for years. And one school minister has recently had 20 repairs to its roof in the last 2 years, even though it's been on a waiting list for a new roof for 10 years. That sounds penny wise and pound foolish. How do we get to a situation where these repairs can be carried out in a timely manner?
I think the issues across the sector in terms of the level of investment that is needed is well in excess of what's directly available. So the last call that was made, there were around about 6,000 applications in terms of minor works that were received in October 2017. Those have then had to be ranked as part of that, and obviously as well in terms of where we are in October 2017, there can be an intervening period, various works that can be put in place. There's over 1,300 of those schemes have been completed or are currently being progressed, and so from that point of view, there's also additionally around about 625 emergency and unavoidable schemes were progressed in the last financial year, and anticipate that a similar number would be done in this financial year. But as with anything, the level of capital budget is always a mix between what we have in minor works, what is there in school enhancement programme, what is there in new school build, and it's about trying to get a mix between them. As with anything, although I think COVID has acted as a level of constraint on what can be done from a practical point of view, it is always the case, notwithstanding that if there was a capital budget that was twice the size of what it is, then I'm sure twice the money could be spent ultimately in that regard. So it's operating within that. I can entirely understand the frustrations of individual schools who will see issues around that, and sometimes the answers to that will be in minor works. Sometimes, as perhaps the member alluded to, there can be a danger that simply doing a minor works in a school can be throwing a certain amount of good money after bad, which is why we have capital programmes in terms of both major works and SEPs, but it won't cover every situation. But if the member has any particular direct concerns in terms of individual schools within East Antrim, I would be happy to receive correspondence from the member, and we can then chase down the detail in relation to those individual cases.
I call Pat Cagney.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Minister, can you provide an update on how the additional £18.1 million announced in January will be spent, and whether any of this funding will be carried over into the next financial year?
The aim on that, in terms of capital funding, that was through the monitoring round. 15 million of that is directed towards minor works. A lot of those will be used, which can be actually brought forward. Obviously, one of the issues that has been raised, particularly as regards some of the minor work schemes, will be where risk assessments have been done in terms of fire risk assessments. Now, quite a few of those were planned then for 21-22. The additional money that's been able to be received will mean that we can front load those, which means that there's around about 35 minor work schemes which are mainly focused in on those recommendations, which are therefore able to be brought forward. And these works will be initiated immediately, and as much work completed in the financial year as possible. Obviously, it is challenging when we will always try and bid as much as possible as we can in monitoring rounds, where is I suppose the one restriction: if you're getting a January monitoring round, anything has to really be spent directly on that front by the end of March, or alternatively surrendered. But the aim is to, while this is through the Education Authority, to press the EA to try to make sure that as much as possible is done between now and the 31st of March.
I call Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and thank you very much, Minister, and congratulations on getting that extra money for the minor capital investment. Could I ask, in that investment, I know you've said that there may be a problem getting it spent by the end of March, but we do have an issue that we need increased accommodation space in classrooms to allow safe social distancing to happen. Can any of that minor capital investment now be used for those schools to ensure that we can get our children safely back to school?
Well, don't forget, we do need, if you're talking about safe social distancing and indeed works of that nature, it would probably go at a level that, in terms of, from a point of view of reaching that from February to being implemented in March, would be very difficult in that regard. So we've got to be trying to be creative as possible. I think anything that can be spent, anything that can be diverted in that direction will be. I think the practicalities of even just issues around procurement and some of those issues will mean, from a practical point of view, given that it's a monitoring round money, to have that much of that diverted, to be honest, between now and the 31st of March is going to be difficult. But we're trying to. The delivery mechanism on the minor works is through the Education Authority. We're trying to ensure that as much pressure is kept on the EA to make sure that there is a high level of spend as possible.
Moving on, I call Patsy McGlone.
Ceist ever do. Question number 2.
Thank the member for his question. Just give me a moment. At the beginning of the pandemic, I set up a continuity of learning programme with a focus on supporting pupil learning. Recognising the specific needs of the Irish medium sector, I included a separate work stream for Irish medium education. This brought together representatives from across a range of educational bodies and support service organisations. Specific resources have been provided for Irish medium schools and pupils through this work stream. Guidance and support for parents has either been translated or developed. Workstream representatives have facilitated links with the BBC with a view to increasing its bite-sized Irish medium programming. The Education Authority has developed a website to provide a single point of access for information, especially during a time of remote or blended learning. This website includes a distinct area for Irish medium schools to access resources, guidance and support through one portal. My department works closely with its arm's-length bodies on providing resources, support and solutions for our practitioners on the ground, and that includes providing specific funding to the Education Authority and CCEA to provide Irish medium support. Furthermore, Altram, who are funded by my department to provide support to the Irish medium preschool sector, has developed a range of resources, including phonetic resources for parents' own language development and audiovisual language resources to assist parents with remote learning. All this work was informed by the valuable advocacy of CNG as the representative body for the Irish medium education sector. This partnership approach will continue and be built upon for the benefit of all pupils in the Irish medium sector.
I call Patsy McGlone for supplement.
Thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his comprehensive answer. Could the Minister just clarify if, in fact, that support that he has outlined is in reality or is in fact an additional resource and additional support, financial and otherwise, that's being provided to the schools?
Resources, and so, for instance, there's been resources that have been produced by CCEA as part of the programme. So, for example, I'll give you an indication of the range of interactive resources that are available. There's an early years phonetics scheme that's been developed to extend to years 3 and 4. A dictionary of mathematics terminology, Irish language talking clock, electronic versions of translated textbooks and development of a series of talking books for post-primary to provide auditory exposure to the language. I suspect part of the complication that has been faced from a practical point of view is probably the extent to which on-the-shelf sort of resources are available from outside of Northern Ireland. And so I suppose where there's been a level of disadvantage that the Irish medium sector has had is that with English medium education, largely speaking, can draw down, for instance, from resources in the United States and Canada and in various other places. To a certain extent, then, I think that a lot of the work that's had to be developed and has been developed, for instance, by CCA, has started much more from a base position of what can be done internally within Northern Ireland and looking, I suppose, to the Republic of Ireland if there's any additional assistance can be provided there. But that has at a level of constraint which has meant that on-the-shelf resources have been less readily available. I suppose additionally, from the practical point of view, and we tried to give a greater level of flexibility to Irish medium schools, I think one of the other disadvantages that they have had has been that the number of substitute teachers that they could draw down, because it requires a level of specialism, And there have been other sectors which have faced not dissimilar problems. I don't want to maybe draw direct comparisons, but the pool of people that can be drawn upon, for instance, to provide during the periods of the COVID response, to provide all those full support bits, has maybe been a narrower pool in that regard, and that has obviously created some level of constraints as well.
I call Orlia Flynn.
Last Concordia, and I thank the Minister. That was a very detailed answer. But we know that there was, particularly during the first wave, there has been significant gaps in relation to Irish medium, the Irish medium sector, but also organisations representing newcomer families. And I know, Minister, you had mentioned in your first answer there around the work streams that was set up. But can you outline, what direct engagement you have had throughout this process with the Irish medium sector and indeed any of the organisations working with the newcomer families?
Well, look, I think we tried to work with all the various sectors, with all the different groups. To that extent, I think that in terms of resources EA provided, they've tried as much as possible to provide translations. And we recognise that particularly there's a wide range of newcomer families within Northern Ireland from a very diverse parts of the world, which does make it challenging to meet all those needs. I think the member highlighted particular problems in the spring of last year, and I think, to be fair, that was something in different ways was actually hit across different sectors, because I think none of us, would hold our hands up across this chamber and anticipated the level of disruption that was going to happen last spring. I think it's undoubtedly been the case that through a range of sectors, certainly the feedback I would generally get, particularly from parents, has been that the level of remote learning, the level of assistance that is there during this lockdown, while I think all of us accept that face-to-face teaching is the best possible opportunity, has been much better in this period of lockdown than it was in the first, when essentially to a large extent people were caught unawares. I would also indicate as part of the support has also been then in terms of information to parents and translation, because I suppose again one of the particular issues and barriers within particularly Irish medium education and indeed education for newcomer families as well has been that while there's been a lot of work has been provided by way of remote learning, by way of lessons directly from the schools, the intermediaries in this are quite often the parents on the front line of this. They obviously will not have the same level of teaching experience, but some will then face linguistic issues. And for example, in the Irish medium sector, there will be many children who are being taught in an Irish medium background now, whose parents would not have had perhaps the same opportunities during their period, and their knowledge of Irish would not be as great as their children. So that's, I suppose, a level of barrier. But I think there are resources being put into that as well.
I call Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thank the Minister for his answer on a sector of our children who perhaps need additional resources. The Minister, I'm sure, will agree with me that looked after children often require additional help, whether that's pre-COVID or through COVID. What additional measures have been put in place for these young people to ensure that they are not further disadvantaged?
Well, I think, look, it's part of the wider picture in terms of vulnerable children. I think there's been interaction in terms of looked after children with the Department of Health to try and provide whatever level of support, try and work on an interagency basis. It's also the case, which I think is something which at least is quite welcoming. Obviously, any looked after children will also count as part of the wider pool of vulnerable children. We've seen a much greater degree of opportunity. One of the things that was made very clear during this lockdown was an encouragement of vulnerable children and looked after children to be directly in schools. The uptake in that has been much greater this time than has been previously the case. And I think one of the things that was very concerning in the first lockdown was the number of particularly vulnerable children who were not directly interacting with schools, were not in schools whenever they had the opportunity. And I have to say, from discussions that I would have had with ministerial colleagues in different jurisdictions, that was not a problem that was simply in Northern Ireland, but was found to be common in a number of jurisdictions. I think it's the considerable greater level of uptake and support that directly is happening by way of that supported learning that is happening and supervised learning that is happening within schools, particularly for looked after children. But it remains something that is ongoing work, and particularly in terms of looking after children, not just from my own department, but working closely particularly with the Health Department and the good work of his own ministerial colleague on the subject. We'll try to work closely on that too. Particularly, I think there's a need in these. It's very difficult for all young people, but particularly for our most vulnerable in society, needs that level of support.
Can I urge members when asking a supplementary question to connect to the earlier oral question, the listed question? I now call Harry Harvey.
Deputy Speaker, that will be question number 3. Thank you.
Speaker, with your permission, I will answer number 3 and number 9 together. I'm committed to ensuring the Executive Children and Young People strategy is taken forward as a matter of urgency, despite the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, if anything, it's even more vital in the current context that we work together in a coordinated way to improve the lives of children and young people and address the issues they face. In many cases, these issues and the problems that many children face have been exacerbated by the pandemic. The Children and Young People strategy provides the vehicle for coordinated action. It's been developed with extensive input from a wide range of stakeholders, including, crucially, young people themselves. It reflects what is important to them. Its aims are ambitious and will only be achieved if we cooperate with renewed commitment to address the many challenges identified. My officials are currently developing, in partnership with other departments, a cross-departmental delivery plan which will set out the actions to be taken over the next 3 years. These actions will focus on, which is part of the plan, the 40 areas of greatest focus, and these have been identified by stakeholders and listed within the strategy. The delivery plan will identify where cooperation will be required to address specific issues and who will be involved. We're also compiling a suite of population indicators which will be used to track progress in outcomes and help us gauge what real difference is being made to the lives of children and young people. I intend to bring the delivery plan to the Executive for approval by May of this year before it issues for public consultation.
I call Harry Harvey for supplement.
Deputy Speaker, thank you, Minister, for your answers thus far. Could the Minister indicate how the implementation will be monitored?
Look, I think, as I said, the delivery plan itself will be something that will touch on all departments, probably some a bit more so than others. But I think all departments in collaboration with their delivery partners, because there's also third sector bodies, there will be arm's length bodies. Those departments will be responsible for the implementations of the actions which they have identified in the plan. Some will be cross-cutting, some will fall particularly to an individual department. On behalf of the Executive, my department has lead responsibility for publishing, monitoring and reporting to the Assembly on the Children's and Services Cooperation Act. And the monitoring of the delivery plan is a key element of this process. To support this, then, the department will be putting in place monitoring and reporting structures which will oversee the delivery of the strategy, provide accountability and aid cooperation. It's intended also, it's important that a wide range of stakeholders, not just in terms of where we've got to, but that a wide range of stakeholders will have a voice in the monitoring process. This will include, amongst others, the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, the statutory children's authorities, children's service providers, academic and practice-based research, but also, most importantly, children, young people and parents themselves.
I call Karen Killen.
And I thank the Minister for his responses thus far. And I welcome the fact that his report will be brought forward in May. But surely he would agree with me that some of our most vulnerable children and young people, particularly those going through special education, should be our priority, particularly now, given the situation we're in. I do understand his position regarding vaccination, particularly for those in special schools, the whole entire staff. But could I use this opportunity for him to talk to his colleague in health to ensure that all the school community, teaching staff and every member of the school community
It's an opportunity for questions.
Is vaccinated. So would the member bring that back to his executive colleague on Thursday, please?
Well, I'd be happy to have I will be having fairly constant discussions. The executive, I suppose, took a view that they wanted, first of all, to get a level of consensus. So obviously the Health Minister, and particularly the Health Department, will be critical to that. It is also the case, I think, that the executive specifically, while I've highlighted the education sector, there will be other departments who will take a view of specific groups within their remit that should also be prioritised in terms of vaccination. It is fairly clear that that will operate on the basis of the JCVI position. But look, I would share with the member her view, and I've made it clear on a number of occasions I want to see prioritisation for the wider education sector. I think there's highlighted a particular need and a strongest need within the special schools sector. And that is because both the vulnerability of the children, but also the level of interaction that is there. And there has been some progress on that. But I want to see a situation in which there is early vaccination of all education staff, because I think as well that will be a benefit to our children, to our parents, but also to those staff in being able to provide a level of continuity. But obviously that will be part of wider wider executive discussions. And I suspect, given the desire to ensure that in terms of at present the rollout is on the basis of an agreed prioritisation list, I think the role, particularly of the executive, will be to try to lobby and give a Northern Ireland voice to that larger and wider discussion. Given, I think, where we are having the overall level of success in terms of vaccination process and the number of key groups that are being of clear clinical vulnerability that are being reached with that, I think there's a clear debate which is opening up more and more and will be across a range of jurisdictions on what are the next steps. And I think prioritising key worker groups, I think, have got to form part of the overall thinking within that. But I think to some extent that it will include education staff. I think it will have to go slightly beyond that as well.
I call Chris Little.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I agree with the member for North Belfast. The key aim of the Children and Young Persons Strategy is healthy children. So can I ask the Education Minister to be clearer? Which special school staff will be vaccinated and when, in order to promote safe and healthy special schools during this pandemic?
Well, I thank the member for his question. As I indicated, my position is I think there is still a good argument saying that all special schools should be. There has been ongoing work involving the department, the EA, strategic leadership group of the special schools, the Public Health Agency and the CMO. What Health have indicated in terms of where they would prioritise vaccination is around a range of children with particular clinical vulnerabilities. There is a list, but it's not exclusive to that, I think, of 16 interventions around that where staff will interact with that. I think we're at the stages where I think that it's effectively a two-stage process where there's identification of the children that would be the staff will be interacting with, and then I think in terms of delivery directly on the ground, there's then a role directly for the schools themselves to identify those staff. Now, I appreciate that puts sometimes the schools in a difficult position, but if Health are indicating that they can only justify from a clinical point of view intervention where it is directly those staff that are involved, I understand that work is nearing completion, that the list of children are more or less there. I think the next step, and I think the principals have indicated that they didn't want to do it directly over the half-term period, but that there would be identification of those. That will lead to a reasonable cohort of those. It will not go as far as ideally I would want to do, but I think part of that is to try to reach a level of consensus within the executive and the executive as regards, particularly with Health. Health, understandably, and they can speak for themselves, will want, above all else, to ensure that the integrity of the JCVI programme is not in any way breached, and that's an understandable position. But again, I think there is benefit in actually ensuring that everybody within special schools is vaccinated as soon as possible.
I call Justin McNulty.
The Minister will know I've been like a broken record around the need for a more comprehensive programme than that being delivered on the Restart. A recharge programme that helps kids recover and catch up physically, academically, socially, emotionally and mentally. A major focus in the Children and Young People strategy is on mental health and well-being. Given that we are now facing a crisis in mental health amongst our young people, what immediate commitments can the Minister give in terms of additional funding or resources to help tackle this?
Well, through the emotional health and well-being strategy, we were able to, as part of that which allies with the Children's and Young People's strategy, we were able to mainstream in 2021 an additional £5 million directly from education, then with an additional support of £1.5 million from Health. There's £6.5 million directly this year's budget that's been baselined. Despite the fact that we're moving to a scenario in which effectively there will be flatline cash in next year's, we're ensuring that that on an ongoing basis will be baselined. But there was also, as part of that, a level of £5 million that was made directly available in terms of COVID recovery in 2021. I think one of the slight degrees of frustration that we have seen sometimes with COVID on some of the issues is that COVID itself has both created the need for particular interventions and sometimes created a level of barriers to those interventions going as far as they can do. So there's restriction on the ground. As indicated to the member, the previous occasion whenever I brought a paper to the executive, which then sort of indicated that on balance that we needed to extend remote learning to the 5th of March, that one of the key aspects of that was seeking the commitment of the executive in terms of a new Engage programme. The member may call that recharge, we'll call it engage, whatever. I think we'll not disagree over the level of language. I think that in looking towards the recovery position, and there'll be a broader paper will be brought to the executive, there's an overall ask which, first of all, I think will involve both the educational catch-up but also the mental health and well-being side of it. And I think there's got to be probably, I think one of the lessons is to look to see whether there's a greater level of flexibility. What's it? Physical as well. I know the member opposite will be getting all the children in Northern Ireland through their paces on that side of it as well. I would say in relation to that, while I think the lead on those responsibilities lies principally with the Department of Education, there is also an important role where I think particularly the Departments of Health, communities and others can step up within that. And I think there's also good work to be done in terms of working with partnership with third-party organisations, particularly on issues around mental and physical well-being.
The Minister's time
well.
is up. Okay. Moving on, I call Steve Aiken.
Question number 4.
Sorry. There. The post-primary transfers are organised and operated by private providers. I understand to date only the Association for Quality Education Limited, AQE, has indicated its intention to initiate preparations for proceeding with tests in the next academic year. I will, however, be engaging with AQE Limited on these. I will be engaging with AQE Limited on these arrangements. However, it's vital that AQE Limited also engage with pupils, parents, and other stakeholders sooner rather than later on how the test will be conducted, including their approach to the safety of children. While the Post-Primary Transfer Consortium outlines its proposals, when it does, similar engagement will be taken forward at that point with PPTC for the GL test as well.
Thank the Minister for his answer so far, and I need to declare an interest here as I have one of my daughters who will be going through the transfer test procedure if it goes ahead later on this year. But the question is, Minister, is that previously we have been pushing quite hard for transfer tests to be taking place within the primary school settings themselves. And indeed, could you say whether you're having any engagement directly to see if that process can indeed take place?
Yeah, look, I think the aim would be to try to proceed with engagement now. I think the problem, I suppose, tends to be twofold. One, obviously, as they're privately set tests, then ultimately I think that AQE and PPTC would need to be bought into that. Having said that, I suspect that is not the barrier. The problem, I suppose, is that back in 2016 there had been a long-standing, I don't know how much it was entirely a bar, or at least a memo was sent out saying primary schools are not to be used as a host for that. That was lifted in 2016 by myself in that regard. So there's no barrier to it being held in a primary school. What we would need, because the opportunity for it to be held in primary schools will require the buy-in of primary schools themselves. It will require, largely speaking, the boards of governors. And I suppose I'll be happy to convene people to sit around the table to discuss that. I think one of the problems is that if we were to get buy-in, we need effectively buy-in across the board, because if we ended up with a scenario where some pupils even were able to sit within their own primary schools and many others were not, you create a sort of a home and away advantage. But look, I think the best, I would agree with the member, I think that the best possible place for pupils to actually sit the transfer test would be in the environments of their own primary school.
And that is the end of our period of time for listed questions, and we now move on to topical questions. And I call Declan McAleer.
I'd like to ask a member, the Minister, has he any assessment of the level of engagement with remote learning amongst pupils in this lockdown compared to the lockdown last year? And I will also declare an interest as a parent of 2 teenagers at home who are grappling with this new means of education. Thank you.
And I'm sure the member opposite will be a very good example to be able to promote sort of remote learning with them. Look, I think we are monitoring the situation as regards remote learning. Directly speaking, within schools, both ETI are looking at the broader element of remote learning. Each school has a link officer. And indeed, as part of that, all schools were told at the beginning of this year, because while I think none of us in September would necessarily have anticipated where we would be in February of the following year, the situation was there was obviously an acceptance there was likely to be levels of disruption. So all schools were told to have a remote learning plan in place. Certainly the sense of things I would get is that the levels of remote learning, because I think, to be fair, there was an element where schools were somewhat taken by surprise last spring. I think the levels of remote learning have been considerably improved, and indeed the standard of that. But obviously the problems with remote learning are not simply what is happening for the individual with the either devices or indeed the lesson plans, but the fact that I think one of the disadvantages of remote learning compared to face-to-face teaching is that it's taking that pupil out of the environment where it can be a strong learning environment, where they are with their fellow pupils in front of a teacher. And while there's tremendous work that's been done, particularly by parents during the lockdown, it can never be quite as good as the direct intervention within the schools itself.
Call Declan McAleer for supplement.
I thank the Minister for his comprehensive answer. Obviously, the disruption of face-to-face learning, which is compounded by many other factors, including broadband, an issue which I raised previously with his colleague, the Economy Minister, indeed, but also which my colleague Nicola Brogan has raised as well. You know, this disruption will obviously have an invariable impact in the curriculum and indeed their qualifications. What preparations has the department got in place to try and ameliorate these challenges of disruption to the curriculum and the qualifications?
I mean, the member's right. I think there's a level of disruption to the curriculum. I think by accepting that remote learning cannot be of the same amount of quality as face-to-face teaching, we shouldn't also, though, fall into the trap of believing that necessarily that means that there is across the board a loss of learning. But what I think that does need to happen, that's what I'll be putting for the detailed proposals to the Executive, is a sort of a catch-up programme. You know, if Mr McNulty is very nice, he might even call it a recharge programme, which impacts not just on mental health and physical well-being, but also particularly at the academic catch-up. Those will have different strands to it, so it is about what is done during the remainder of this academic year, and also then what happens, what additional interventions, there were some last year in terms of during the summer, can be done during that, particularly on a voluntary basis, and then what additional support can be provided during 21-22. I think it's also the case that particularly as regards to qualification years, the member will be aware that certainly for 2021 there's a different model of assessment has been put in place, which moves away for this year away from examinations for 2021, because I think it would be unfair to try to subject pupils to that. And clearly there will be a knock-on effect into 2022 in terms of how we look at qualifications. And indeed, I think there will be, unfortunately, with a lot of things in society, there will be echoes of the problem that we're having with COVID that will resonate probably for years to come. And it's about trying to ameliorate those as much as possible, rather than be in a position necessarily to get absolutely everything removed as a problem.
And I call Paul Given.
Speaker, Minister, could you outline any plans to bring forward legislation to this House?
Thank the member for his question. My priority with the time remaining in this mandate is to bring forward legislation which addresses issues relating to the flexibility of school starting age. I've instructed officials to begin scoping out the work for a potential bill within this mandate. I fully support the concept that parents, especially those with premature children who are born late in the academic year, should have some level of flexibility around this issue. That's why I've instructed officials to prioritise this bill as my department's key legislative priority. Given the close proximity to the end of the current mandate, there will be significant pressure on the Executive's legislative programme. Any legislation I will bring forward will therefore depend upon the Executive agreeing to proposals from all ministers as well as members. On a personal note, I've made aware cases of people like Freddie and Isaac, who were two premature boys whose parents would love some flexibility around school starting age. Let me assure the House that I will do all within I can to address those concerns on behalf of boys such as Freddie and Isaac, and many more like them whose parents have campaigned on this issue.
I call Paul Given.
Well, Minister, can I welcome that announcement that there will be that flexibility given for June birthdays and indeed where you have premature children. I know that's something that many families will welcome, and indeed charities that have campaigned on this issue will welcome this announcement today by you, Minister. Can you assure the House that, given the time frame that is left for this mandate, that the various different stages will be completed and royal assent given to this bill before the next election?
Well, as I said, we're just over a year away from the end of the current mandate, and the legislative programme will be busy. So I've asked my officials to prioritise the policy development work and the consultation that will be needed before its introduction to the House. I mean, there is, across the board, I think our school system largely works well, but it doesn't work for everybody in terms of that flexibility. So in taking this forward, officials will need to assess the implications across a broad range of policy areas, including what happens to preschool provision, special education, the age at which a person commences post-primary education and school leaving age, the curriculum at key stages in area planning. So because I think many of these policy areas are also set out in primary legislation, I'll also need to assess the impact on our educational partners, the Education Authority, for instance CCMS and CCEA, the Controlled Schools Council, and rightly conduct extensive public consultation. This will take a number of months, but it should provide, I think we want to have a sound policy basis for taking forward future legislation that meets the needs of the young people that most benefit from it. And I'm sure, I know the Education Committee, I think, while there will be the odd issue that on other points we may have a little bit of clashes, but I believe that the Education Committee, I think, will be very constructive and positive when this eventually comes before them. And in the meantime, I think it's important that parents make informed choices about what they want to do, including speaking to the school that they may apply to discuss how their child will transition into Year 1.
I call Trevor Lunn.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Just to go back to Dr Aiken's question a few moments ago, in recent years, even pre-COVID, several grammar schools decided that they would move away from academic selection. So can I ask the Minister, is he content with that trend, or would he intend to put any pressure on those schools to revert to his preferred system, or will he let matters take their course?
Look, I think legally, first of all, there is both a right of academic selection in law. It is also the case that the position is that legally it is actually the responsibility of the boards of governors. Look, I believe in the right of schools to use academic selection, so I will not be pressurising them into a position to abandon it. And we are seeing, and again, I think through no fault of anybody within the system, because I think it's been overtaken by COVID, we are seeing a range of difficulties that will translate and probably be magnified when it comes to the point in June when individual pupils and families will find out the destination of their location for post-primary school. That in a system, certainly without any level of alternative, that without a transfer test, there are a lot of problems that creates in and of itself on that basis. And I think the issue is that while, for instance, we will recommend a range from the point of view of guidance of here are criteria which we believe to be better than others, almost inevitably with any form of criteria will advantage somebody as opposed to somebody else on that basis. So look, I will be working with the sector. I don't believe that in general there's a particularly, certainly from those schools, I can't certainly speak for all of them, but those schools that felt this year they were unable to use academic selection because of the lack of a transfer test, I think are largely very heavily and strongly committed to using academic selection. But the choice remains, because it is an issue for Board of Governors, that they do have the choice whether to use that or not. And I know also that in the past, some schools have used it for particular streams and done a sort of a bilateral approach as well. And that is also something that's legally permissible.
I call Trevor Lunn for supplement.
Yes, I thank the Minister for that answer. And I do appreciate these are difficult times and perhaps not the best time to have this discussion. But would the Minister consider, given that a number of schools now have, for this year, in fact all the grammar schools, will have chosen their input without the benefit of academic testing, that it might be an opportunity to study those schools, particularly the ones who had already made the decision not to go with selection tests, and to see what effect, if any, it's had on their performance?
I think the issue, if we're talking about performance to some extent, because if you're looking at what the intake is within a particular year, that certainly in terms of, for example, where does that appear in terms of academic records on that basis, I think would be something that would take a number of years to be able to determine. Because anybody, for instance, entering simply in Year 8 in September in terms of particularly where they would show up on, for instance, GCSE statistics. I think it will simply shift about the balance a little bit. But we do, I believe, have a system which across the board does have high levels of success. We've seen, both at primary level and post-primary level, that when we've had comparators, in many cases to other jurisdictions across the world, that we have had a considerable level of success, and also in terms of reducing underachievement as well.
I call Gemma Dolan.
The Minister will be aware of commentary in recent weeks about how best to recover lost learning time, and as part of that conversation the idea of whether to pause and repeat this academic year has been suggested. While this may be of benefit to some children and young people, I don't think such a blanket proposal is the solution. Can the Minister advise what contingencies are in place if a parent feels that it's in their child's best interest to repeat this year?
Well, I would be at one with the member in terms of the overall assessment of that. I think the idea, and I appreciate, people will be looking at blue skies thinking it's perfectly natural in relation to that. In terms of the repetition of a year across the board, would create enormous, leaving anything else, would create enormous practical difficulties in terms of, if we're looking at the issue was mentioned earlier about accommodation within schools, about, do we have a situation where children then operate on the basis of a 15-year, or do they skip a year at a later stage, etc. And also, actually, the educational information would suggest that, generally speaking, where there is repetition of a year, in general, on average, for a lot of pupils, it certainly is not an advantage. In some cases, it can be a level of disadvantage. For specific individuals, there is provision, I think, that Board of Governors can accept a child effectively repeating a year or being a year late. Now, within the current system, that is done in a relatively small number of cases. Across the board, I think out of the 330,000 children that are within the school system, there's a little bit over 5,000 of those are over age for their year. Most of those, however, will be through particular circumstances of either special educational needs or, quite often, very understandably, for some newcomer children, particularly who have language difficulties. Around about 2,000 within the system are over age. So it will be for Boards of Governors to consider that, and I suppose for parents to make a representation on an individual case to that. But I think parents do need to be careful just in terms of the implications of what they do for their child as well. They will be in the best position to judge the individual interests, but it's not an easy solution for people, and I don't think people should go into it blindly either.
I call Gemma Dolan for supplement.
Thank you, and I thank you, Minister, for your answer. As part of this conversation around pausing and repeating the academic school year, the issue of applying flexibility to school starting age has been highlighted again, and I welcome that you intend to bring legislation forward to provide the level of flexibility that many parents and children need. But what can those parents who want flexible school starting age now, particularly in light of COVID, do?
Well, directly speaking, I think it is about engaging with their schools. I think with the best will in the world, the aim will be to bring legislation forward this autumn that will not directly impact on the 2021 cohort, and there's nothing we can do retrospectively. Part of the problem, as indicated in terms of the rigidity there, is on the basis that what we have is, in terms of school starting ages, in primary legislation. So there can't just be, if you like, some clever manoeuvre from any of us to be able to get round that. I think what I would encourage parents is to engage directly with their schools. It should also be the case, I want to be clear on this, that I think there is a lot of work to be done on the flexibility. This is not something where people simply have a broad ideological or a belief that it's just too early to be starting at that age. It's got to be under very specific circumstances, because we need something which can work for the system. And broadly speaking, the system does work well in terms of school participation, in terms of academic progress for children. But the lack of any level of flexibility means that for some families, they are left in an impossible position. And it is about trying to deal with those exceptions rather than the rule, which I think will be critical as we move ahead in terms of school age flexibility.
Our time is running out. I call Pat Cagney for a quick question.
Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Minister, you'll be aware of the huge increase in the number of children and young people who have had to be placed in care. From the Education Committee, my colleague here, Justin McNulty, found that there was 178. Minister, what plans are you putting in place to support young people and their families, both now and in your COVID recovery plan? Thank you, Minister.
Well, the recovery plan's got to be comprehensive across a range of issues and probably look, as I said, not simply at the academic, but mental health, physical well-being, but also the interaction of specifically groups will require cross-departmental work, working with health and that sort of things, because solving some of the issues for individuals will be on a very individual tailored basis, and that's why I think that's where the focus needs to be for those particular children.
That is the end of our period of questions for the Minister of Education. We now turn to item 5 in the order of paper, the adjournment. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned.
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed.